the end of the day, I mean, I think they must be put to use. So we have come out with a commercial plan, which is not, I mean, which is partly subsidized, in the sense that we give the box for free. And we also provide bandwidth at a reasonable cost. And today we have reached, in the last 4 or 5 months, we have reached about 2.5 lakh households. They are wired up with fiber connections. And I mean, we couldn't believe that, that the per household consumption has reached nearly about 160 GB per month, which is amazing, I think. So therefore, there is a huge pent-up demand out there. And I'm sure that the way we are going to expand now will actually satisfy that requirement for information and the connectivity to the world, I think. So I believe that BharatNet has a great opportunity to actually be a complement to the mobile networks. While 5G gets rolled out, the mobility aspect of connectivity will get addressed. But I guess there is also a parallel requirement for connectivity at the households, I mean, where penetration may be inadequate. Yeah. So people have requirement for online education, for businesses within the households, and perhaps even doing online businesses, I mean, e-commerce and so on and so forth. So they will require a complement between the mobile and the fiber, and we believe that this is a great opportunity that we have before us.
You know, you talked about the opportunity, and you also talked about how many households you've managed to connect so far. But you also alluded there to monetization. But there was a lot of chatter about the fact that monetization had actually been derailed, that there wasn't that much public-private, there wasn't that much private interest in wanting to partner with the public. So are you saying that that's not the case? Is there private sector interest?
It's a very good question. See, incidentally, fixed line networks, optic fiber networks are very expensive to maintain, especially because we have huge construction work going across the country. We have a huge number of programs.
India is forever under construction.
Yes. So therefore, cuts, I mean, every fiber network suffers nearly about 4 cuts per 1,000 kilometers per month. So the cost of maintaining an fiber optic network is very onerous. So therefore, and coupled with that, we have a low, I mean, what do you say, expected revenue base in the rural areas. So it's a very hard market, unlike the urban areas. So therefore, the private sector perception of this particular value of this particular network is a little low. I mean, I think we can well understand that. Therefore, I think we have decided to go forward with the public sector model, wherein BSNL will maintain it, run it, and then monetize the last mile. So we are not monetizing the whole network, but the last mile, where from the village point, I think they will take it to the households and maintain it and service the customer. And that's worked well, I think.
I'll come to BSNL and the revival package that the government announced for BSNL in a second, but let me get Mr. Subramaniam into the conversation as well. Mr. Subramaniam, you know, as part of the India at 75 vision, Niti Aayog had put together a strategy document, a strategy paper on the use of digital technologies, the use of digital innovation. As things currently stand, beyond Ayushman Bharat, beyond health and financial inclusion, where do you believe the next bed of innovation will lie, especially in the context of the development state that the Niti Aayog is pushing for?
Before I answer that, I'd like to actually take you back. What's the importance of digital public infrastructure? I think that's very, very important to understand. You see, I think the digital space grew in an area of benign neglect. Governments around the world allowed them to grow because I think that was required very early on. One didn't understand how these digital technologies would grow and how they would pan out in the long run. But over now, the last 20 years, people have actually realized that there are a lot of externalities that come out of this. There are network externalities, and actually a few firms can actually dominate the entire digital space. And that's where I think the digital public infrastructure concept becomes very, very important. I mean, it's very related to what we call technology commons. And commons are a public good. So there is a fundamental question. Is the digital architecture through which the world today, and certainly the world of the future, is going to be run by a few monopolies or oligopolies, or is it going to be left common on which a lot of innovation, technology, entrepreneurship can drive? And I think that's where India is a leader in 3 areas, and in the thought itself, in content, and most importantly in rollout. I mean, we have been rolling out it in billions. And therefore, you have so many examples of digital public infrastructure in India. And you've got the UPI, you've got Aadhaar, you've got the account aggregator stack, you've got CoWIN, you've got the agri stack coming up, you've got the logistics stack which is coming up, there's a labor stack in the pipeline. So NITI plays an interesting role. I mean, the role of NITI is, A, as a think tank of the government, Its job is to ideate, incubate,
Yeah.
and then transfer, the IIT of the government. So as the IIT of the government, I think it's done it successfully. It pushed digital payments. I think it's in the process of pushing a couple of other things. I mentioned agri, I've talked about labor, I've talked about logistics. I mean, the portal was conceived here, but then now you have a department taking it forward. So I see a bright future, and I see this space being an area to drive Indian technology and much more Indian entrepreneurship in India and globally.
You know, that's a nice line that you've given us. Niti Aayog is the IIT for India, and I can see many will probably go with that headline tomorrow. It's a quotable quote there, Mr. Subramaniam. But, you know, I'll come back to you on the importance of the digital goods aspect that you spoke of and what we can now expect in the next phase of growth. But let me get to Dilip Aspi of NPCI. And before I get to you, Dilip, let me do a quick poll here of the audience. How many people here use UPI? Literally everybody in this room. Dilip, that should bring a big smile to your face.
Who didn't raise the hand, actually?
Who doesn't use UPI?
Yeah.
That's one solitary gentleman in the room, and okay, three people in this room who don't use UPI. So, well, the house is on your side, Dilip. But let me start by talking to you about something that has captured the headlines overnight, and I know you've spent a large part of your day clarifying that. What is the reason behind the charges that you've brought in? I know you've clarified that these charges don't impact you and me, i.e. the consumer. It is at the merchant's end that the charge applies. But explain to me the reason behind this, and I'll also tell you the fear in the mind of the customer, that this is only the start, that this is the start of charges being imposed on consumers for using UPI. The other fear is, look, consumer will have to pay one way or the other. The merchant will, in a way, get the consumer to pay. So I want you to clarify on the rationale behind these charges and whether this could lead to more such kind of charges.
So first of all, Shireen, you know, there are two entities which are actually taking part in the merchant payments. One is the customer and second is the merchant. And obviously there is a P2M, which is person to merchant and person to person transactions in UPI or any other payment system. So one thing is very clear, that customer never pays for any payment transaction, right? Whether it's a peer-to-peer or peer-to-merchant. Always merchant as a user of the payment system pays the nominal reasonable charges for the payment system. So that's the first principle. The second point is the UPI for the bank account, using the bank account is already free with the government notification. And again, if there is a review, if there is a change, again, the government will have to decide on the next course on that. The notification which we issued was pertaining to the prepaid wallets, right? Because with the RBI guideline, the wallets are now interoperable. And while they were already operating on the cards, they were not permitted in UPI. So to permit them in UPI, the interchange was permitted. So that's, I think, a nutshell clarified. Again, there as well, only the merchant pays, the consumer doesn't pay anything.
You've made that amply clear, not just here on the Rising India stage, but even in the NPCI press release that came out this morning, clarifying that the consumer doesn't need to pay.
Yeah.
But the larger question is, Dilip, when we're talking about moving to 1 billion transactions, you know, which is what the aspiration is for you. You're anticipating a 10x growth from here by 2030. Someone's got to pay.
Yeah.
Who is going to invest? Where do you get the money from?
So again, it's a great question. And, you know, today as we stand, you rightly said, the near-term goal, which is next 2 years to 3 years, we are looking at 1 billion transactions. We are at 30 crore on a daily basis, the peak transaction.
That does deserve a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. 30 crore transactions.
And it's all made in India, operated by India for the citizens. I think it's a great beginning, I must say that. It's not the end. We still have to grow 10x. So I think when we look at 1 billion a day or 10x growth, which is the 3 billion per day, which is the true potential of India, you are right. I think we need money. We need investments both on the customer side, because there are 600 million eligible customers who can actually come inside the digital payments who are outside today. There are another 100 million merchants who are outside the digital payments who can come inside. So I think it is going to need money. You know, as on date, you know, the government is kind of giving the digital payment incentive to the ecosystem, and there is a dialogue with the ecosystem and the government, the stakeholders, that, you know, how do we grow UPI to 10x now, and how do we ensure that the awareness, education, the whole consumer and merchant onboarding for the large number takes place even if we don't do anything, Shirin, it will happen in next 10 to 15 years' time. Now the question is, can we do this by 2030? I think that's the question which we are looking at, and I think it's an issue which is under discussion. So let's see how it progresses. As of now, the government is paying the incentives, and ecosystem is still trying to look at a very positive, with a very positive outlook that we need more investments, banks, fintechs, everybody.
That is the reality. We need more investments. If the consumer is not going to pay, who does, Mr. Subramaniam?
I'd like to add a point, I think everybody remembers, flying in India was supposed to be a rich man's fancy. And you remember Captain Gopinath came with Deccan Aviation, and then he said, we'll sell tickets for 1 rupee. It changed people's mindsets. Today, everybody thinks of flying as an alternative to railways, irrespective of what their income levels are. I think the same thing with UPI. In the initial years, you need to promote, you need to see that it becomes a habit. And then once the ecosystem is large enough not just domestically, but that you're able to compete globally, because there are alternative payment systems, you should be able to be strong enough to take them on. At that point, one can think of other ways. But in the initial years, all technologies need to be sustained with some degree of support.
Yes, that support, as you put it, is understood. But you talked about the global aspiration. Let me get each one of you to comment on that. And Dilip, I'll start by asking you. The plans to globalize UPI, an initial beginning has been made with the pact that's been struck with Singapore and India. I know that you believe that this could be the model, this could be the template for what we could do with other countries. What's the appetite? You are going to be speaking. Dilip is on his way to the G20 Sherpa meeting in Kumarakom. He's going to be speaking there. This is one of the priorities that the Indian government has set out as part of the G20 presidency. I mean, how quickly do you believe UPI can truly globalize?
So, Shirin, the Prime Minister's vision and again the government, RBI, all are working towards the way India is self-sufficient on the payments for the domestically. I think next 10 to 20 years time, a long vision is to be self-sufficient on the cross-border pipes as well. And it's a time-consuming process, but the beginning has been made with the Singapore-India corridor. I think in 30 seconds, one country's bank account can be debited and another country's bank account can be credited with all forex conversions, the compliances, the checks, AML, all CFT. I think the Singapore model has given that confidence to the world, in my assessment, that in 30 seconds, two bank accounts in 2 different countries can transact. I think this is just a beginning, and the RBI, the MEA, the government is also helping us to reach out to the other central banks and their agencies to create this cross-border pipes. It's a long journey, but I think everybody's committed to make this happen. We'll have to look at an investment approach, right? Because the transaction will take longer time to pick up to the level what you're looking at. But I think the outlook is outstanding. $100 billion remittance we get on a yearly basis. Plus we have a huge travel now outbound from India. So I think it's a great story. We'll have to keep doing this.
So in the next 5 years, what would you believe we could, where could we be as far as globalization is concerned?
So I think, it may not be a very wrong to say that, at least a few countries utilizing the India's payment stack, right? Prime Minister said that India's public good can be the public good of the world. Similarly, having the cross-border pipes with at least 15 top countries out of 30 to have the self-sufficient cross-border pipes to process remittances and payments. Well, and that's a vision we are looking at.
Well, it's not going to be an easy road, as you know.
Absolutely.
But that is the vision, and it's an aspirational vision. Is that, Mr. Rajaraman? Speaking of aspirational visions and targets, the 5G rollout. I was speaking with the global CEO of Ericsson, and he said that what India has been able to do as far as the 5G rollout is concerned so far is probably the fastest 5G rollout in the world. And by the end of 2023 or by March of 2024, between both Jio and Bharti, we should see nationwide coverage as far as 5G is concerned. You've already been tasked with rolling out 6G. I mean, when are we realistically talking about that?
It's a good question, because if you look at our story, starting from 2G, I think the country was essentially a consumer of technology, I think, for 2G, 3G, and a best part of 4G. So that was very unfortunate. I think though we had the capabilities, we look at the history. We had an organization called CDOT. We have an organization. CDOT's contribution to the construction of building digital exchanges in those days, in the 90s, is phenomenal. I think, the way it was able to replace international options was phenomenal. But somewhere in between, I think they lost the opportunity to innovate. So not only CDOT, but the entire ecosystem. But the last several years, I think I would say 7-8 years, I think the confidence has returned to the local domestic industry. Because essentially, it is not about building technology. Building technology has to come along with market access. If we don't promote our own products, who else will? So therefore, I think that is the confidence that the industry has got today. So therefore, I would say the last several years, I think, let me also say that while we are talking about mobile technologies, India is a world leader in optical communication technology. Some of our companies are exporting to nearly about 40 countries. They have fiber networks, the optical communication networks, and so on and so forth, routers, and so on and so forth. So it is in mobile, I think, probably somewhere we lost in between. So the last several years, I think now we have built a 4G core, put it to the strictest standards of tests, and now we are there, I think. So, and CDOT has also rolled out a 5G NSA core. And by end of this year, they are going to roll out a 5G SA core. And it's not only about CDOT. I think we have companies like TCS, Jio, all of them have made contributions. They are all now enthused enough to say that, okay, we are also going to join the bandwagon. And let me say that the 5G rollout itself, Jio stack also contains their own, equipment. So this is something which we are very proud of, incredibly proud of, and we need to support it. So how do we support it? That's the question. That's a fundamental question. So one is providing market access. The other is we need to fund the R&D. If you look at the world majors, they all have spent tens of billions of dollars every year in research. So our research by far has been very, very low. So for the first time, I think we have now a formal system. We have a telecom technology development fund. We are funding startups. So I think this needs to grow to scale. I think it's not as if government has not been funding, but focused funding on a particular technology where we've been largely consumers of technology is the focus. So I think a combination of market access and investment in R&D will get you there. I think. And we are very confident because now we have stacks which can compete with the best in the world. And I think maybe the end of this year, we will see substantial global traction as well.
You know, I think, and that's been a legacy issue, the lack of investment in R&D, public as well as private, and that has been something that we need to correct. But, you know, since we're talking about 5G, I'm going to do another quick poll here of our guests. How many people have already switched to 5G? Well, that's not bad. That's about 30% of the room has perhaps moved over to 5G. But you know, Mr. Subramaniam, since we're talking about what is going to be the next layer of innovation, especially in the context of the priorities of a development state, accountability, efficiency, transparency, where do you believe we currently stand on that front? And how important do you think it is going to be in this era for India to really have a robust law, data protection and data privacy law, which we don't currently?
I think on the data protection law, you've seen the statements of the minister. I think the act is in the final stages. I think probably in the monsoon session, you'll have the act coming up. They've had public consultations. I think it's a forward-looking act, and I think the concerns of industry as well as stakeholders have been taken on board. So I think that's something that's going to be coming up. I think the biggest thing they're going to keep in mind that India is a great provider of digital technologies and software around the world, and so we shouldn't harm that either. So I think as one reads it and one is privy to some of the discussions that are going on, we will have a forward-leaning data protection law, which will also ensure that our existing businesses which are there in the country, and India is a major services producer, both domestically and internationally, that without that being heard, adequate data protection is there for the individual. Coming back to the other question, where do you see the development trajectory going, etc.? I will limit myself again to digital public infrastructure. I think this is one area where India is actually playing the role of a disruptor globally. And I think that's very important. We could have flown along with the tide and then done what everybody else is doing. I think it's very interesting that India is actually poking its nose, creating waves, breaking up existing patterns, creating new architectures, which is allowing our own firms to piggyback on that public architecture and come up with new solutions, new technologies, new applications.
Give me examples of this poking nose disruption that you speak of.
It's very clear. I mean, I will begin one by one. Look at Aadhaar, the identity. I mean, the day is not far away when we're going to sell Aadhaar as an identity globally. I mean, it is quite possible to do that. We already have, I think, about 7 to 8 crore people outside India who use digital identities using our work. So I think this is going to, and instead of having 200 passwords, I mean, this could be a digital identity. Estonia is probably selling digital identity globally, but they're in a couple of million. Look at our size and scale, and we have proved that it works. Look at what UPI is doing. I mean, I'm actually a bit more ambitious than NSPCL in the sense that when I'm not going to look at it as something which is just cross-border, 30 countries or 15 countries. I foresee this as a major challenge to what existing financial transaction systems globally are. This is going to be a threat to SWIFT. This is going to be a threat to other payment systems around the world. I mean, it's not impossible that 15, 20 years down the road, the UPI model becomes the basic payment model around the world within countries for their own internal financial transactions. And where India benefits from that is, being the thought leader in this, it's our firms which will have the products which will then be universally applicable. One of the complaints against the Indian software sector is that we provide, white labor, we are basically doing back office work, and we don't develop products. The advantage of this, and the third one, the account aggregator framework, which RBI has developed. In a way, that is piggybacking on UPI and the digital payment system where you're going to have fintech firms which are going to lend to people, not on assets, but on cash flows. I mean, that's a fundamental shift. I mean, a thelawala on a road doesn't have assets, but he has cash flows, and you can actually lend to people on cash flows. Once you have established that principle, think of how it will explode globally. And so whatever you see, be in Bangalore, Bombay, outside Delhi, these new startups, the unicorns that are coming up, they're not unicorns just for nothing, but they are coming up with business models which are riding on our public architecture, which tomorrow I foresee as at least half or more than half of them being global standards. And building on what NSPC UPI is doing, what India should be doing is, after having established the proof of concept on scale in India, we need to set global standards. And the day that happens, you will see that Indian standards means more Indian created stuff, be it products or technologies spreading around the world. I think that's the game of the future. Are we going to get into standard making? And I think we are on the way, and that's where the G20 will help.
Well, Dilip Asbe, are you ready for this challenge that Mr. Subramaniam has thrown your way? Replace SWIFT in the next 20 years?
No, okay. Look, I think what we are looking at more innovation, as you and Sir was talking about. I think we still have huge amount of innovation to be made by our companies. While the public platform is run, the private players has to innovate, right? I'm saying, so whether you look at offline payments, whether you look at recurring, there is still a huge growth, right? RBI has recently launched a digital currency again. So I think today we are standing at 13% cash to GDP ratio, right? If we want to call ourselves a developed countries in next 20 years' time, I think we should be in a higher single digit at least, if not lower. So I believe that there is a lot more to be done in my assessment.
You've said that it is a journey, and it's a long distance covered, but a long distance to go as well. But Mr. Rajaraman, let's address the issue, since we're talking about globalization and we're talking about India leading innovation. Through the PLI scheme, the government has tried to bring in manufacturing in India, including in the telecom sector. There's also part of that is to try and create domestic champions. But are we creating powerful domestic brands? Manufacturing, contract manufacturing for Apple or Foxconn, etc., is one thing. But to truly be a domestic champion, are we creating brands that can go global?
So this is also a very interesting question. So because essentially one intervention doesn't answer this question. So if you want to build domestic champions, number one, I think we must focus on India designs. Designing a product is very, very important. So while the government launched a PLI in 2021, I think we had a further round of discussion with the industry, and it struck us that probably we should be supporting Indian designed products. So therefore we came out with a design-linked PLI scheme where Indian patents-based products would be given higher incentives. So I think that is the first step that we have done. Second thing, we have set up a telecom development fund, technology development fund, because essentially designs require a lot of investment in R&D. So that also is something which needs to be done. So therefore, at the end of the day, unless we support products which are based on local designs, which means that Indian companies must invest in R&D, I think then India's presence in the global space would be rather restricted. So therefore, our exercise has been to answer this question in different ways, I think. And third, of course, is market access, about which I've already talked, I think.
You know, Mr. Subramaniam, let's address this issue because I think come February, which is the time that the union budget is presented, everyone in the corporate sector says there should be more incentives given to corporate India for R&D investments. And this has been a long-standing demand. There have been many changes. In fact, there's been a rollback of the incentives that the government was providing. But if India truly has to lead when we talk about innovation, especially digital technologies, what do you believe the government can do to facilitate or spur private investment in R&D?
I was just recently reading a paper, and they identified 44 critical technologies which are critical both for security as well as for industry, as well for leadership. And of course, the big worry there was China is dominant in about 35 of them. They're number one, not United States. But the more interesting thing is that in about 30 of them, India is in the top 5. So, I mean, let's not be sad about what Indian R&D is doing. There is a lot of good R&D going on in India. But the fact of the matter is, are we getting into products and are we getting into brands? And I think the point you said there was earlier. I'll combine the two and answer. Number one, I think there is a development life cycle even in industry. You first need to get into manufacturing. I mean, a lot of manufacturing has got hollowed out in India. I mean, in his own sector, Indian telephone industries was the first public sector. And then we started importing a lot of stuff. So I think we're getting back onto the rails. So let's get into mass manufacturing first. That's what China did. But just wait, in 4-5 years, from mass manufacturing, China has now brands. And there are brands everywhere. So I foresee the large-scale production that is there in PLIs gradually transforming into brands, because at some point the company who's actually doing manufacturing for a third party is going to think, why can't I make my own brand? So I think that's what the evolution is. We never supported scale. Let the scale come in. Once the scale comes in, I mean, human innovation will take them to brands. Coming back to R&D, I think issue is not about tax benefits or whatever. I think the primordial urge of industries to survive and grow requires them to invest in R&D. And they are doing it. I mean, look at our automobile sector. And I'm going back to my past position wherever I was. You talk to the two-wheeler industry in India. The two-wheeler industry in India is global, the world-beating, and they're the best. They're not terrified about any two-wheeler from some other country. Go to EVs. In two-wheeler EVs, today India is top gun. Nobody can beat India in two-wheeler EVs in the kind of technology. And it's not that you're making the two-wheeler. It's the inner components, the parts, the touch screens, all of them are now designed in India. There's nobody else who can be there. I think that's where, be it the FAME program, be it the PLIs, as we push more into these areas, I'm quite sure R&D is as important as manufacturing. It will happen in consonance. And you've got departments which are individually supporting R&D.
Mr. Rajaraman, you know, since we are talking about manufacturing, let me very quickly get an update from you on the semiconductor plans. Again, a very aspirational, ambitious plan that we put on the table in terms of manufacturing semiconductors here in India. What's the update, sir? We've all been waiting for one.
So this is with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology.
I know, but I know that the government doesn't work in silos anymore.
Yes,
At least that's what we keep hearing.
Yes, but then I think the process of calling for proposals are in the final stage of examination. So we expect some decisions probably in a month or two. So at the end of the day, it is a process. So it is just not about announcing a set of initiatives. A lot of initiatives are already happening. Like for instance, we in India have a very strong fabless design capability in Bangalore and many other parts of the country. I think, in fact, most of the multinational companies have their back-end fabless chip design facilities in India. So the R&D headcount is huge. I think. So the capabilities already exist in India, except we need to move to the next stage of fabrication. In fact, that is being overcome by the industry by actually sending it out to other countries. So I wouldn't say it's a disability, but if you go to large-scale manufacturing, well, it is in a sense. So I think maybe in a couple of years from now, I think once this initiative takes off, so there are 2-3 parts to it. One, of course, is to set up the fab facility, for which I think probably the decisions are in a very advanced stage. The other thing is to create the ecosystem that will support it. That's very, very important, because you need the skill sets and you need the supply chain. because both are very critical to the semiconductor industry. A supply chain which is very, very specialized, I think rare gases and specialty chemicals and so on and so forth. So that is something which the government is actually working with, and I think there are a number of producers already in India who are now being kind of coordinated into producing to scale and to the quality that the semiconductor industry requires. And also, the government is also actively working with the industry in actually building the skill sets that are required for manufacturing. So therefore, that requires people with lithography skills, the EDA tools, etc., etc. So I think a number of institutions and number of collaborations are on the job, including design of advanced chipsets, etc. And as far as our department is concerned, we've also launched a submission to look at about 3-4 telecom chipsets, which are crucial to telecom manufacturing, and we'll also be working on them, I think.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Dilip Asbe, you're headed to the G20 Sherpa meeting in Kumarakom. You are going to be presenting your story, the UPI story, the NPCI story there tomorrow morning. Why don't you give us a sneak peek on what the story is going to be that you tell the G20 here with us here in the audience?
So Shirin, I think we just have been talking about how the UPI can help any other country. We have spent about 12, 13 years now building up the digital payment story of India. So why the country has to spend all the time, all the efforts, right? So that's a pitch back to the other countries. Obviously, it's their choice to use or not to use, but we are kind of looking at a knowledge support. We are looking at a software support under the regulator-to-regulator arrangement. We are also giving the source code to the central banks, so that they are self-sufficient and they are not dependent on India for that matter. So these are the kind of things, and obviously, how do we make the cross-border efficient? Because one of the G20 mandates has been improve the access, transparency, the cost, and it has to be real time, right? So these are the 4 principles of G20 laid down for the cross-border remittances. So again, how do we get more traffic on adhering to these 4 principles? So a lot of work, I think, a lot of discussions are happening, and we believe that hopefully the countries are looking at India as an aspirational story which they can use as their partner to build up their domestic payments.
Okay, well, that was a very quick sneak peek on what Dilip is going to be presenting to the G20 Sherpas in Kumarakom tomorrow. I know you have a flight to catch, Dilip. So thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to Dilip Asbe, the CEO of NPCI. We wish you the very best of luck as you make your pitch to the G20. Gentlemen, let me come back to the two of you. Mr. Subramanian, let's address the issue of what we can expect next. The Niti Aayog, in fact, has put out a paper saying that digital banks could be the future, that India has a facilitating environment in light of Aadhaar, in light of everything else that we've been able to do with UPI, etc., that digital banks may not necessarily be far away in the future.
You see, digital banks is an old idea. I mean, it's at least 20 years old. There are countries which have floated digital banks, but they've just not taken off for a variety of reasons. What you have had is actually computerization of brick and mortar banks, and then your interface with branches has reduced, but banks have not vanished. But now that you see the building blocks are already there, you've got a payment system, you've got an identity system, you've got your presence-less, paperless, cashless, all that happening. Digital banks is just one step away. It's just a question of RBI as a regulator becoming comfortable with the concept, and it's not far away that RBI will also have to accept reality, that this is the way forward. And India is actually best positioned to do that. And once you have digital banks, and of course there'll be a different regulatory setup for that. It's not a payment system, because banking system affects the entire economy. You need some prudential norms to manage that. But once the RBI sets up and recognizes the need for this, understands that technological progress is inevitable. So, and then you recognize that, you set up regulatory system, I think India can be a leader in digital banks. I mean, Niti's paper is a forward-looking paper. I think that's the job of Niti, to wake people up and shake people up and say that, look, if you don't do it, somebody else will do it, and why don't we do it first? And if we do it first, we again become global leaders in that area.
Yes, this was a paper presented by the Niti Aayog in 2022 on how India can take the leap as far as digital banks are concerned. But Mr. Rajaraman, you know, Mr. Subramaniam said Niti is the IIT of the government, but let me ask you about the work that you're doing with the real IITs, which is IIT Madras on the 5G test bed. You know, while everyone's talking here about 5G and eventually moving to 6G, where India wants to be the leader as far as the 6G rollout is concerned, but use cases of 5G that are relevant and contextual for India and our aspiration for growth, what do we have as of today?
So let me first of all answer the first question on this test bed, I think. So since you're, I think I must place on record some of the finest engineers in India, I think many of them who stayed back in India and working hard silently. I think I would like to recognize them. Like for instance, the engineers, the 1,500 engineers we have in CDOT, phenomenal work they have done in developing the 4G core and the 5G core. Similarly, the IITs you mentioned, there are many professors out here who are doing high-end research in 5G advanced, and some of them have got 6G related patents as well, I think. So these are outstanding people who are also, I think, taking the tough task of actually filing a patent. Filing a patent can be incredibly difficult. Let me tell you that. I think it can be incredibly difficult because getting a global patent is even more difficult. So this is something which actually inspires a lot of us, I think, because we believe that these researchers out in public research institutions, in IITs and in industry are the ones who are driving the nation by creating new products and employment.
They do deserve a round of applause.
Yes,
the silent but real heroes who are working across different institutions on new technologies like 5G, etc. They do deserve a big round of applause. Sorry, you were going.
Yeah. So there is also another category of people who I believe are great heroes. Like for instance, the BharatNet, the question that you asked, there are, in the last 5-6 months, we have enrolled about 5,000 BharatNet Udyamis, who are youngsters out in the village, who have taken the trouble of drawing the fiber and taking it to the houses, maintaining, answering the customer calls, and making the digital India happen. So these guys, I think they're the ones who are probably going to take digital to the villages. So these guys are amazing. In fact, I think when we send teams out to the rural heartland, incredible stories emerge. Like for instance, I remember a particular story about an old man who is living in a village in Haryana, whose son was there on a short visit. After seeing the fiber and the digital connectivity in the village, he promised his father that I will bring your grandchildren back to the village now from the US. So I think I think they are going to host the grandchildren for the first time after several years because they have now hope that they can stay connected, I think. So these are the stories that you get from the villages. So coming back to your question on 5G use cases, I guess these are early days. I think the technology is getting rolled out across the country. The feel of the technology is also something which enterprises need to understand, the costs, the benefits, etc. So at this point of time, in the last 8-9 months, we have actually launched an interministerial committee, which is working with all the ministries, the central public sector undertakings, and the private sector to look at sector-specific use cases. The use cases are in education, in smart agriculture, in mining, in enterprise, within the shop floors and the factories, to look at workstation monitoring. So there are incredibly different use cases, including the social sector. Like for instance, there is a use case where AI with, say, high-resolution cameras wired to the smart city control room can actually enable to throw up alerts about chain snatching or some attack in the street or some crime which is happening in the street, etc. So those are the kinds of things that can happen that can enable citizen safety, citizen convenience and comfort when he travels late in the night. So incredibly different, diverse use cases are emerging, and we are supporting them. Every ministry is now funding them, for instance, funding these use cases, because pilots have to be run to ensure that there is sufficient confidence to invest in replication across the country. So I think this is all happening now. I think you will see a large number of use cases getting rolled out by the end of this year and early next year.
Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing what those use cases are that you say will be rolled out by the end of the year. You know, Mr. Subramaniam, we are talking about AI, ML, emerging technologies, advanced technologies. This takes me back to a conversation I had many years ago with Sam Pitroda, where he said that while India is talking about technology and adoption of technology, we would have truly arrived when government offices will replace the Nadewali files altogether. How far are we from that?
Okay, I must mention this. So when I left my previous office and I took a couple of months off, I wanted to tie some paper and take it back. and I couldn't get a file pad in my office to tie it. So actually the nada has disappeared. We are actually in government only on e-office. We are on e-file, everything. I mean, I don't spend more than 20 minutes clearing files in a day. It gives me so much more time to think. I mean, used to have this peon or the class 4 employee whose job was basically to carry files from desk to desk. In most government offices, they have vanished. And I think that's a big credit to the government. This is something that has happened very rapidly in the last 5-6 years. It's a work in progress. We'll evolve to next stage. But the fact is today, files are moving completely electronically, and not just within ministries, but across barriers, across ministries. So I think that's we don't get applications for leave or whatever. So everybody is online, everybody is doing stuff. So I think the government has evolved. We have a lot more to do. We are not yet into data analytics in a big way. Government throws up a lot of data. So using data for decision making, these are frontier areas. But the basic rubric of actually working online is right across. In fact, trying to get something physical now is a big problem.
So we have come a long way. I want to ask both of you, Mr. Rajaraman, I'll start by asking you, what are the apps that you spend most of your time on?
I think it's e-office, as you said, e-office, and then maybe a little bit of WhatsApp and DigiLocker and those kind of stuff. You know, there are UPI, for instance. I think so. These are the and we have a video conferencing app. I think called Samvad and C.Meet. These are also incredibly useful applications. I think.
Mr. Subramaniam, what are you on?
Pretty similar stuff, and I'm not on streaming services, so I don't have Amazon Prime or whatever. But I must tell you one story, and that's very interesting. I think Asbe has left, but you would find it interesting. A couple of months ago, I was on the beach in Vizag on a morning walk, and I wanted to buy dal muri early in the morning. So I bought, and I asked the lady, and she's probably semi-literate, maybe class 2, 3 pass. And she said, "Kitna?" And she said, 10 rupees. And then I didn't have much in my, I had a 100 rupee note. And I pulled it out, and she looked back at me and said, UPI nahi hai aapke paas. And you felt so ashamed, Here is a man, and here is this lady on a beach telling you, don't you have UPI? She didn't even say UPI. Telephone se nahi pay kar sakte hain kya, And, I felt very, very ashamed. I'm not carrying my phone. But, that's evolution. And I think that's the kind of barrier we have crossed. And the day we ride on this 5G and the speed at which it is being rolled out, you will see public switching to it so fast. And the use cases will develop not just inside government, but 10x outside government.
Yes, that is the hope, and that is the expectation, that we will see a lot being built on the 5G networks that are currently being rolled out. Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us here at the Rising India Summit, for giving us a sense of what the government's priorities are when it comes to digital India. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Mr. Subramaniam as well as Mr. Rajaraman. Thank you very much for your time.
Big round of applause. Gentlemen, may I just request 2 minutes to, can you please stay back on stage? I just request Shireen to present them mementos at Rising India, please. Thank you. Big round of applause for them, ladies and gentlemen. So we talk about UPIs. There was a time where they said कि पटवा लेना मत भूलिए. आज ऐसा हो गया कि फोन है ना चल जाएगा. So that's the change that's happened. So from digital transformation or digital expressways and highways or information highways, let's now talk about the hard brick and mortar highways and the expressways, the way India is being connected. Our next session is about one of the most visible transformations that are sweeping India. Sample this. Delhi to Dehradun, 2 hours. Delhi to Haridwar, 2 hours. Delhi to Jaipur, 2 hours. Delhi to Chandigarh, 2.5 hours. Delhi to Amritsar, 4 hours. Delhi to Srinagar, 8 hours. Bengaluru to Chennai, 2 hours. Road journeys are becoming a breeze. And I must say, I have done this. Lucknow to Noida, 5.5 hours. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. You know who we are welcoming next. My pleasure to welcome Shri Nitin Gadkari, Union Minister for Road Transport and Highways, Government of India, to talk about the building blocks of Rising India, and he'll be in conversation with News 18's Kishore Rajwani. Big round of applause for Gadkari ji, please.
वेलकम गडकरी जी। तो पहले तो मैं ऑडियंस को ये बता दूं, आपने एक वादा पूरा किया। आप पिछली बार जब आए थे आपने कहा था अगली बार हाइड्रोजन कार में आऊंगा, और आज आप हाइड्रोजन पावर्ड कार में ही आए हैं। हम लोग हाइड्रोजन पावर्ड बस में कब आएंगे?
अभी तो अशोक लेलैंड और टाटा ने जो उनकी ट्रक और बसेस है वो आईसी इंजन को हाइड्रोजन पे हम चला सकते हैं, ऐसा उन्होंने ऑटो एक्सपो में मॉडल्स लॉन्च किए हैं। मुझे लगता है कि अब वो दिन दूर नहीं है। केवल दो इम्पॉर्टेंट बातें उसमें हैं कि हाइड्रोजन 3 प्रकार का है। एक हाइड्रोजन जो पेट्रोलियम से होता है वो ब्राउन हाइड्रोजन, जो कोल से होता है वो ब्लैक हाइड्रोजन, और जो पानी से और ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट से होता है वो ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन। अभी मुझे बताते हुए खुशी हो रही कि दिल्ली में 3 बड़े बड़े माउंटेन्स हैं। मैंने कहा कि ये पर्यटन स्थल बन गए हैं। ये कचरे के हैं, गाजीपुर और 2 जगह पर। तो अभी हमने 20 लाख टन कचरा, ये जो दिल्ली का यूरिया 2 जो है रिंग रोड, ये जो सोनीपत के आते हुए पेरिफेरल रोड के बाद एयरपोर्ट जाने के लिए 2 से 2.5 घंटे लगते थे, अब 20 मिनट में लोग जाएंगे डायरेक्ट। वो रोड पूरा बना है, उसमें हमने 20 लाख टन कचरा यूज़ किया है। अब इसी कचरे को सैग्रीगेट करके इसमें प्लास्टिक, मेटल और ग्लास को अलग करके जो ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट होगी वो बायोडाइजेस्टर में डाल के उससे मीथेन बनाकर मीथेन से हाइड्रोजन बनेगा। एक मार्ग ये है जो राइस रॉ बगास उससे होगा। और दूसरा सोर्स जो है ये जो गंदा पानी है, कोई भी पानी है पर हम लोग वेस्ट वाटर यूज़ करें और उसमें इलेक्ट्रोलाइज़र, हम इस समय वर्ल्ड में इलेक्ट्रोलाइज़र के नंबर 1 मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब है। हम अमेरिका को एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं। तो इलेक्ट्रोलाइज़र से हम लोग पानी से ऑक्सीजन और हाइड्रोजन अलग करेंगे। फिर जो जनरेटर लगेगा 500 बार तक या 700 बार तक कंप्रेस करने के लिए, वो हम लोग 100% बायो इथेनॉल पर लेंगे, क्योंकि उसमें डीजल खर्चा करने से बढ़ेगा तो कॉस्ट बढ़ेगी। तो वो ये पानी से भी हाइड्रोजन होगा। प्रॉब्लम एक है कि 1 किलो हाइड्रोजन के लिए 50 यूनिट पावर लगेगी, तो उसकी कीमत जाएगी कम से कम $3 $4। और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि इसकी कीमत $1 आनी चाहिए। तो अभी बंगलोर में हमारे इंडियन साइंस रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट है, उनको मैं गया था वहाँ, उन्होंने विदाउट पावर ये बायोमास, बायो वेस्ट से हाइड्रोजन बनाया है। तो वो $1 आएगा, तो 80 रुपये में हम लोग 450 किलोमीटर चल पाएंगे। तो लोगों में बहुत सस्ता होगा, ट्रक, बसेस, कार, स्कूटर। और उसके बाद सबसे बड़ी बात है ना, हवाई जहाज़, बाद में हमारी केमिकल फैक्ट्री, स्टील फैक्ट्री, सब जगह पर हाइड्रोजन हम लोग यूज़ करेंगे। और मैं आपको बताता हूँ जो हाइड्रोजन मिशन हमारे सरकार ने तय किया है, हम ऊर्जा को आयात करने वाले नहीं, हम ऊर्जा को निर्यात करने वाला देश बनेंगे। ये हमारा प्रयास है।
आपने हवाई जहाज की बात की, लोग कह रहे हैं कि आप तो हवाई जहाज़ों का धंधा ठप कर रहे हैं। जो एक्सप्रेसवेज बन रहे हैं अब 2 घंटे में इधर, 4 घंटे में उधर।
देखिए ये बात सही है कि अब इसी साल के अंदर में दिल्ली से देहरादून 2 घंटे में होगा, जयपुर भी 2 घंटे में होगा, तो चंडीगढ़ अमृतसर 4 घंटे में होगा। अब देखो यहाँ से एयरपोर्ट जाना है 1 घंटा, एयरपोर्ट पे बैठना विमान में जाने के लिए 1 घंटा, वहाँ से जाने के लिए आधा पौन घंटा, और वहाँ से घर जाने के लिए 1 घंटा। अब कौन जाएगा दिल्ली से देहरादून? अगर रोड से डायरेक्ट हम नया रोड बना रहे 2 घंटे में जाएंगे, हरिद्वार में 2 घंटे में जाएंगे, तो कोई जाएगा नहीं। मुझे याद है मैं 95-2000 में जब मुंबई में 8 फ्लाइट मुंबई से पुणे के बीच में चलती थी, और जब हमारा मुंबई पुणे एक्सप्रेस हाईवे बन गया, अब तो 20 साल हो गए, अब पुणे से मुंबई फ्लाइट बंद हो गई। तो अब यह नहीं, तो पर इसका मतलब उनका नुकसान नहीं होगा। वो देहरादून से हैदराबाद, देहरादून से अहमदाबाद, देहरादून से पुणे, देहरादून से जयपुर, तो दूर दूर की फ्लाइट और बढ़ेगी, क्योंकि वहाँ 22% ग्रोथ है। जो नज़दीक वाली है वही केवल बंद होगी।
तो ये सरकार सड़क बनाती है या सड़क सरकार बनाती है?
मुझे तो मालूम नहीं, मैं मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ सरफेस ट्रांसपोर्ट का मंत्री हूँ और मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में हम सड़क बनाने का काम कर रहे हैं। और सड़क बनाने से मुझे लगता है कि हमारे देश में जहाँ सड़क बनती है वहाँ विकास होता है। अभी ये द्वारका एक्सप्रेस हाईवे जो हम बना रहे हैं, तो मुझे मालूम नहीं, एक दिन मुझे एक सज्जन हवाई जहाज में मिले और मेरे पैर छुए, तो बोला ऐसा क्यों कर रहे हो? बोले मेरा पूरा धंधा चौपट हो गया था, जैसे आपने ये जो द्वारका एक्सप्रेस हाईवे बनाया, तो उसके बाद में बोले मुझे 2-2.5 हज़ार करोड़ का फायदा हुआ, अब मेरी प्रॉपर्टी सब बढ़ गई और ज़मीन को भाव आया। तो अभी ये दिल्ली की डेवलपमेंट, और अच्छी बात आपको बताता हूँ, मुझे पहली बार पता चला कि ये जो जैसे ये जिस रोड की मैंने उल्लेख किया कि 20 मिनट में हम आएंगे द्वारका, ये जो चंडीगढ़ रोड से, तो इसमें दोनों बाजू में इतने हमने 76 किलोमीटर रोड बनाए। एक्चुअल रोड है 34 किलोमीटर का, पर इसको जोड़ने वाले भी सब रोड बनाए। इसके कारण दिल्ली की आने वाली डेवलपमेंट इसी बाजू में बहुत बड़े प्रमाण पर होगी, और जिसके कारण निश्चित रूप से पोल्यूशन तो कम होगा ही, पर प्लान डेवलपमेंट उस एरिया में होगी, वो भी एक प्रकार से दिल्ली के लिए फ़ायदा होगा।
ये जहाँ तक राजनीति की बात है, आपने कह दिया कि मैं मक्खन नहीं लगाऊंगा, वोट दो या ना दो। ये ऐसा राजनेता कौन बोलता है?
ऐसा नहीं है। मैंने जो बोला वो एक ही वाक्य आपको मालूम है। मैंने ये कहा कि अगर हम काम करेंगे और काम करने के बाद जनता हमको बिल्कुल सपोर्ट करेगी, हम झूठे आश्वासन और बाकी बातों का मक्खन लगाने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है। अगर हम प्रत्यक्ष रूप से जनता में काम करेंगे तो जनता निश्चित रूप से हमको समर्थन करेगी। यही बात मैंने कही।
ये आपकी लगातार शिकायत रही है कि आपको मिसकोट बहुत किया जाता है, तो मिसकोट ये करने वालों की गलती है या आप होने देते हैं इसलिए?
ये आपकी मीडिया इंजीनियरिंग है। एक आदमी गलत छापता है पहले अपने वेबसाइट पर, इसमें ऐसे ही हुआ कि एक दिन कुछ नहीं हुआ, फिर एक ने अपने वेबसाइट पर ऐसा गलत कोट किया, फिर उसको बोलने के बाद 3-4 घंटे में उसने निकाल लिया, तब तक बाकी लोगों ने उठाकर उसमें गलत न्यूज़ बना दी। ये मीडिया की क्रेडिबिलिटी के लिए अच्छा नहीं है। जो बोलते हैं वो जरूर छापना चाहिए, जरूर लिखना चाहिए, जो नहीं बोला वो लटकाना बराबर नहीं है, इतना ही है इसमें।
ये भाषा में भी हो जाता है कि मराठी से हिंदी इंग्लिश में जाते जाते बात सीरियस हो जाती है?
नहीं, मुझे लगता है कुछ एक सेक्शन ऑफ लोग ऐसे हैं, वो जानबूझकर न्यूज़ बनाने के लिए जब कन्विंस नहीं किया जा सकता तो कंफ्यूज करने के लिए इस प्रकार का कुछ तो भी थोड़ा गर्मा गर्मी क्रिएट करने के लिए ऐसी झूठी न्यूज़ लिखते हैं और जानबूझकर लिखते हैं, ऐसा मुझे लगता है।
आप बिल्कुल नाराज़ नहीं है?
मैं नाराज़ नहीं। देखो, मैं इमरजेंसी से आया हूँ और इमरजेंसी के बाद ही राजनीति में आया, तो मैं बोलता हूँ कि ये मीडिया को ने अब समझना चाहिए कि उनकी क्रेडिबिलिटी के लिए वो कैसे काम करें, पर जो लिखने का अधिकार है, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच और फ्रीडम ऑफ राइटिंग, ये संविधान ने दिया है, तो मैं उसका सम्मान नहीं करता हूँ।
आप स्टूडेंट लीडर भी रहे और स्टूडेंट लीडर्स लेकर अब तक का सफ़र आपने देखा, आपने कई बार ये बात कही कि सबसे मुश्किल है कानून बनाना, तो ठीक है, लेकिन कानून मनवाना बहुत मुश्किल है। आप जब स्टूडेंट लीडर थे तब आप कानून मानते थे सारे?
देखिए, हमारे देश की एक समस्या है, ये बहुत गंभीर विषय है। कानून के प्रति डर भी नहीं और कानून के प्रति सम्मान नहीं, विशेष रूप से रोड सेफ्टी के बारे में। कोई सिग्नल है तो रुकना चाहिए। आप विदेशों में जाइए, अगर कोई सीनियर लोग अगर रोड को क्रॉस करते तो तुरंत गाड़ी रुक जाती है दूर से ही, और रेड सिग्नल होगा तो रुक जाते हैं, लेन डिसिप्लिन का पालन करते हैं, हेलमेट पहनते हैं, और विशेष रूप से कभी भी लेन डिसिप्लिन में दूसरे लेन में नहीं घुसते हैं। हमारे यहाँ दुर्भाग्यवश हम कानून को सीरियसली नहीं लेते। अभी ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस, अमेरिका में ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस अगर मिलाना है तो 1-1 महीना लोग किताबों में अध्ययन करते हैं, अध्ययन करने के बाद थ्योरी परीक्षा देते हैं, फिर प्रत्यक्ष जाकर वो टेस्ट देते हैं, फिर लाइसेंस मिलता है। अगर मैंने यहाँ बैठे हुए लोगों को अगर एक सवाल पूछा कि आप में से कितने लोग ऐसे हैं जो आरटीओ में जाकर जिन्होंने परीक्षा दी और ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस प्राप्त किया है, तो कितने हैं? तो बहुत कम हाथ ऊपर आ रहे हैं। अब जो बाकी लोगों के पास भी लाइसेंस है पर वो कैसे मिला होगा? तो कहीं ना कहीं वी नीड सीरियस अप्रोच, क्योंकि देश में 5 लाख एक्सीडेंट हो रहे हैं, 1.5 लाख मौतें हो रही है, और 18 से 34 वयोगट में कम से कम 60% हमारे नए लड़के लड़कियां, यंग टैलेंटेड इंजीनियर्स, डॉक्टर्स, उनका एक्सीडेंट में डेथ हो रहा है। तो मैं ये जरूर कहूँगा कि कानून इसके बारे में जो रोड